Smoking was allowed in the office. I can remember looking over it. You could tell the day my supervisor was having a bad day when you saw the amount of smoke hovering over his head.
How big their ashtray was.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Defense Never Rests. I am your host, Trisha Baxter, and today's episode is all about a career in claims. I am lucky enough to have one of the most amazing guests. He has over 40 years of career experience handling claims. He's now an independent adjuster. Joe Giamfola, he is here today to talk with us about his claims history as someone who directly handled claims and is someone in management. And I love his thought process here. Before we get into the episode, I just want to say, hit that subscribe button. That way you get notified for every new episode. And once you listen to the episode, if you happen to like it, go to hit that rating and that 5-star review. We'd appreciate it. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Joe. Hey, Joe, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited about today. This is the podcast that I've wanted to do since we first started podcasting. I think we're on episode 20-ish, something like that. It is really talking to somebody who has lived and breathed the industry for 30, 40 years. And I love that you're on here and we're going to just talk about your journey and the tips and tricks that you've picked up along the way. So let's start from the very beginning. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And where is that? Have you kind of lived in this area most of your life, or have you traveled any?
No, I've lived in the Philadelphia, South Jersey area all my life.
Yeah, well, I'm not all my life. I'm moved to Philadelphia, South Jersey about 20 plus years ago and have stayed, and I love it. So, tell me about your education or your formal education. What kind of high school, college? What did you do?
Well, I graduated, this is taking me back, but I graduated from Northeast Catholic High School for Boys over in Philadelphia, and it was all boys. That school, unfortunately, is not in operation anymore. I think that's a victim of the problems at school, financial problems that the Archdiocese of Philadelphia was having. So it's been closed for a couple of years now. Then I went directly to LaSalle College. At the time, it was a college. It was not a university. And then when I got out of school, needed a job, and I found my way purely by chance, to Allstate Insurance Company.
And how old were you at that point when you first started working for Allstate?
I was 22.
So then you get to this position at Allstate. What was it called? What was the title of it?
Claim trainee. And
did you have an understanding of what that was going into it, or was it sort of like you're just going to wing it and see what happens?
No understanding of it whatsoever. Remember, the motivation was to earn money, and I don't think that was unique. I think a lot of people that around that time, and maybe even after that, it was just by chance they found their way into an insurance company as a trainee.
Do you remember those first couple years, or is it more of a blur as a claims trainee at Allstate?
I remember them pretty well.
What kind of stuff were you doing in the first couple of years?
Well, first of all, Allstate, the majority of Allstate at the time was personal lines. I think they had a small commercial operation. But it's personal lines insurance, automobile, homeowners, and some personal umbrella. And I wound up for the first couple of years handling liability claims, personal insurance liability claims. As a trainee, I started off in the office, and then I went on the road, which was a nice experience. And then rather quickly, and probably too quickly, became a supervisor.
And when you say too quickly, what do you mean by that?
Well, at the time, advancement, I think, was restricted to going into management. At the time, I don't think I viewed anyway advancement as just advancing or choosing a career path where you can advance within a job as a claims adjuster. So management was the was the goal, and to get into management as quickly as possible. That was my goal. And in retrospect, I think it was too narrow-minded in my thinking.
Well, before you advance, when you're handling the liability claims, are you handling small, medium, large exposure across the board? What does that look like?
All of the above. But one of the things about, other than the personal umbrella claims, one of the things about the automobile liability and personal liability business is that the limits were relatively low. I mean, $100,000, let's say, back in 1977 was a lot of money. I'm talking about the limit of the policy, but it certainly wasn't. The vast majority of the time was not in excess of 100,000, with the exception of personal umbrella claims.
What about the training? Did they give you any training? What did that look like?
Yeah, Admiral had, Admiral, I'm getting ahead of myself. I still to this day, I could recall myself being on the phone at Admiral and saying, "Good morning, Allstate. May I help you?" Allstate had a terrific training program, good formal training program. I spent some time learning the policies for about a week at the original office, purely all classroom. And then soon afterwards, I spent a couple of weeks out in Illinois for some more in-depth training, which embraced not only follow-up for auto insurance, but also and homeowners insurance, but also basic legal concepts, negotiation skills, things like that. And then after that, of course, was on-the-job training, and it was pretty structured, where certain goals had to be met each month. So I thought Allstate's program was pretty good.
When you started, was it besides the classroom sit-down training, did you have the mentor shadowing kind of on-the-job training, or did they just let you loose after the classroom training?
No, there was I would describe it as maybe an informal mentoring program, which included, at the head of that would be your supervisor. And then the supervisor would also have you do some training with some seasoned adjusters. Now, I say informal because while regular, it was kind of ad hoc, as needed.
When you finally were let loose to handle, I assume after the training, even the ad hoc kind, you were eventually let loose to handle claims on your own. Is that right?
Well, I wouldn't say after. I would say not too long after it began. The training would continue, but I would be handling claims, let's say, within a couple of months of my employment and after the formal training concluded.
What was your claim load like at that point?
Well, let me just say this as a caveat. If you talk to me while I was an adjuster, my claim load was always too high.
Yeah. Well, that's a complaint I get a lot from people I work with.
Even if it was low, it was too high. But I think, looking back, I think it was manageable. I can't give you a specific number because it really depends on, not only the type of claim you're handling, but also the procedures or the workflow within a specific company like Allstate. I never found it too high. At times, it was a little stressful, but it was the stress was to me, was kind of healthy. It wasn't overwhelming, but at the same time, it made demands on you to perform.
And that was my next question, because I think as a young claims adjuster, not having years of experience under your belt, because I think claims is nuanced. I think a lot of it is, it's the technical part of it, but it's also the reading people, negotiation, evaluating. So as a young adjuster, I got to think that maybe it's a little nerve-wracking. And is that the case for you?
Sure. It was nerve-wracking because, for me, everything was new. As a claim trainee, as I said earlier, I didn't know what I was walking into. But I would think it's natural or normal to have it be nerve-wracking purely because it's a new experience. But also, you're right, it is nuanced. Dealing with lawyers, let's say, especially experienced lawyers, when you're just out of training, is a different experience altogether. That in and of itself is nerve-wracking.
What's the nerve-wracking part as a lawyer? What's the nerve-wracking part of dealing with us lawyers?
Well, I would say this, and this is not BS. I think most of the lawyers I dealt with were a great majority of the lawyers I dealt with were professional, considerate, courteous. It doesn't mean that they bent over backward to give you a break because you're new. There was a small majority that took it kind of. I thought maybe took advantage of youth and inexperience, and maybe you have a certain amount who would try to badger you into getting what they want, meaning more money and the settlement of a liability claim. But you know what? That's pretty much in any business. Like if you walk into something that you're inexperienced in, the nerve-wracking part of it is you're dealing with somebody who's more experienced, and that could be a disadvantage.
And then you also have on top of that the legalese that I think lawyers speak sometimes, or the law that we tend to know a little bit more than the claims adjuster. You add that layer on. Did you find that challenging to navigate as a younger adjuster?
Yeah, of course. I think anybody would say that. But one of the things I did, and this probably would lead into a discussion later on, is that I recognized pretty quickly that although I did not want to be a lawyer, I was dealing within a lawyer's arena. So the one thing I better learn quickly I did, and I still do to this day, is to be able to read case law and understand the basics. That has given me not an advantage, because I'm not going to say that I can match up with a lawyer in terms of the training, but reading case law was so important, and my confidence started to grow and today I feel very, very confident. So if a lawyer sends me a letter and cites all the case law that supports their position, now I know that they're trying to make a case, so they're going to cite case law that makes their position. They're not going to cite case law that is negative to their position. And I learned that relatively quickly, and I've read, and this is no exaggeration, hundreds of cases. That gave me confidence to be on a level playing field with a lawyer in terms of coverage law and tort law and contracts as well.
I love that tip. I think you're probably the first person I've talked to that has said that. I have claims adjusters or vice president of claims that are also lawyers. So, and I know that they read the case law. They started in private practice and then moved into claims or an insurance company. But I love that you did that. I mean, I think that is really valuable, especially if you're in a part of claims like coverage or products or auto where you see repeat legal themes, that to understand the cases that pop up routinely. I think that's a great piece of advice.
And case law is educational because a well-written opinion kind of goes over that, gives you the history of the case, and in and of itself is educational. So it kind of puts things in perspective and gives you a foundation for which to jump off. And getting into let's say I handled a bunch of pollution claims when I was younger. Getting into what sudden accidental means before you get to that point. The exception to the exclusion in a standard CGL policy. You kind of go over the history, if it's well written, about what the heck that specific jurisdiction, how they saw language in a policy, and how other jurisdictions saw language in the policy. And you quickly catch on that if they're well written, they also follow a standard procedure, like what's the law to interpret? How do you interpret contract language? And then you get the basics, and then you get into the nitty gritty. And to me, I just found that well written, and I keep saying well written because some of them not so much, but
yeah,
well written cases teach. I mean, and that's the learning part of it. And I kind of got into that. And
I love that. Yeah. That's also a very good point. And I'm not trying to blow smoke here, but it's a very good point. The well-written ones will go through the history of cases and decisions and holdings, and they'll talk about the why you have this holding, and instead of just knowing what the law is, having an understanding of why the law is that way is super helpful. So I think that's fantastic. So let's fast forward to now you're in let's go back to your bio, if you will. Let's fast forward to where you're now in a management position at Allstate. And you stayed at Allstate for about 7 years. Is that right?
Actually, or 14 years.
14 years. Sorry. 14 years at Allstate. And I assume that once you got elevated to management, you probably continued to get elevated and you stayed in management. Is that fair?
Yeah, for the rest of my career at Allstate, I stayed in management and left as a manager.
What was that experience as a manager like?
I can only speak from my experience, but I think candidates for management were promoted because of how they performed in handling claims and their ability and knowledge of claims, more so than their ability to lead people. As far as I could see it, it wasn't so much can Joe lead a unit. It was more so what is his knowledge and technical ability to lead the unit. And I think that was probably not the correct way to elevate somebody into management. I think you had to also take a look at the ability to lead.
Did you struggle with that when you got into that position, trying to manage people? Was that a skill that you had to learn that on the job?
I struggled with. I had to learn it on the job. I had to remember now I'm responsible for the performance of anybody besides myself. I mean, it was other people. So that was a new experience. And I think ego gets in the way a lot. And ego is probably your biggest enemy. I still struggle today with ego, but a lot less than I did before. And that came with years of experience. But I think ego can get in the way of somebody being an effective leader.
So give me an example of how you think it affected you in the beginning.
Probably in the sense of me being right, always having to be right about something, whether it be a specific claim issue or a personnel issue. And that was wrong for me because, I'm 25 years old and I'm managing a group of people who are all older than I am. And I failed to take into account, I think, the experiences or the experience that this older group of people had. And I should have listened more instead of letting I have to be right get in the way. That was probably the biggest. I know it sounds a little nebulous, but that was probably my biggest experience.
I think that probably you're right. A lot of people, listen, I struggled with that too. When I first got into a leadership position, if you will, is that mindset that as a leader, I should be right about everything. And then I think I've learned, and it sounds like you've learned the same thing. It's not healthy. It's not a way to grow a team or to support a team. But when you first get into it, especially if you're 25, like I didn't get into leadership till I was in my 40s. So it's a little bit different. But at 25, that's got to be a little bit hard and still relatively new to claims.
And retrospectively, although I would have hated it at the time, I wish I had not gotten into a leadership position that early in my career.
Were you still handling claims, or were you just overseeing the other people that were handling claims?
I was overseeing people who handled claims, but it was almost as if I was handling claims because one of the things, and I'm not pointing fingers at any company really, but I think one of the dangers is to kind of micromanage people. And it was almost as if I was handling the claim myself. And that probably, I know if it happened to me, I would not resent it, but I would be frustrated by that. So because of all the numbers of reviews we had to do of people who were handling claims and the what I consider low authority levels to handle claims, it was almost as if I was handling the claims.
So give me an example of that if you can, like when you were supervising and maybe micromanaging a little bit, what would you go into their file notes and look and see what they're jotting down, how they're reserving, how they're evaluating? What were you doing?
Well, absolutely. You would, keeping in mind that it was all paper at the time. So, you would have a certain quota of files that you needed to review each month. And you would review basically coverage, liability, and damages, but also any, the big three, but you also would review based on your procedures. And the claim manual was pretty clear on what the procedures were. So you would be reviewing the substantive part of the claim handling, but also the procedural part. And I remember we used to do our reviews in red. So that was like probably some of the people had some psychiatric problems after that. But can you imagine? They're writing, and then you put everything in red. And then it got to a point where our reviews were longer than what a diary or the notes of a claims person would be. And I thought, it's getting a little ridiculous. It shouldn't be the case. So that's where I took that very seriously. So the extent of my micromanaging, I could see would be very frustrating retrospectively to the people I interviewed. But it was, answer your question in a long-winded way, was liability coverage and damages and procedures that the company asks you that require that you follow and handle the claim.
So when you would have that situation where the red marks were way more than the original file notes, what did you do with that situation? Did you go back to the claims adjuster and say, hey, here's what you need to do next time? Or was your quota too much to do any of that?
It was too much to do it. There was too much, I thought, of these types of reviews that interfere with exactly what you should have been doing. It's not only put your review in a file, but also speak personally to that person and say, here's what the reasons why I said this, the reasons why I made these suggestions. So because of the amount of files that had to be reviewed, that interfered with your ability to sit down one-on-one with someone and talk to them about a specific case.
Did you ever let go of the micromanaging?
Yes.
How long after you got into a leadership position or management position did you start to realize that maybe that wasn't the best way?
I'll say this is an estimate. I would say probably within at my 7-year point at Allstate, and that's an estimate. But I realized that how I was approaching managing my people was counterproductive. And I was micromanaging way too much. And so I made a concerted effort to pull back, and that was a good decision.
Yeah. Was that an epiphany that you had, or was it like you read, like for me, I stepped away from micromanaging a couple years ago, and it was the best thing that ever happened to my sanity and the people that I work with sanity. But it was because I was reading stuff, business books and things. What was that process like for you?
I don't know if it was I don't know. Well, I think it was probably an epiphany, but it wasn't a sudden thing. It was just gradual. And one day I realized if I wanted to stay in management, and I didn't know whether I wanted to stay in management or not, because frankly, I did not, and we could talk later about it. I was not finding myself enjoying it. But I got to the point and thought, well how productive am I being? How counterproductive am I being by doing that? And how do the people in my unit feel about being micromanaging? And I'm talking about people who have more experience than I do. And then it came to a matter of how much trust do I have, and I should have more trust. And I have the right to, and I have the right and obligation to trust people to do their job, especially if, given that person's background in terms of experience and education. And it was a really good feeling because then I started getting into more of the personal interactions one-on-one instead of how much red ink I put into a file and whether I was doing my job or not.
When you got to a point where you really let go, I know it was a gradual process for you, but when you got to the point where you really let go, did you see this is a multi-part question. Did you see a difference in the people that you were managing? Did you see a difference in the claims themselves?
Yes and yes. First, I saw a better relationship. And it wasn't that we became personal best of friends type thing, but I think it was a better relationship because it felt like there was an elevated mutual respect, which was key. And I felt that just showing somebody that you trust them to handle the claim and reach a resolution on the claim, that went a long way in and strengthening a relationship. And I think we did see better results. I think we saw, certainly in terms of frequency, closing. They say closing the closed file is the best file. So I think I saw, and I hope this isn't being more of a. I hope this isn't what I wish happened, because I really think it happened, is that saw more productivity, and I saw some. In my opinion, I saw some better results.
What about the inverse? Did you see any claims go south because you weren't adding your 2 cents?
Yes. Yeah. Well, let's say, when I said adding my 2 cents, that doesn't necessarily mean that. And this was another realization too. I wasn't God, and so any suggestions or decisions that I made may not have been right at all. But that the consultation itself between a person handling a claim and a manager, or any other consultation that a company has set up, is really good, because it enables you to make a more informed decision and see other points of view. Now, getting back to files go south, yeah, some files went south, went south, but I have to tell you, generally speaking, the big picture, that's quite all right. I mean, cases are going to go south for whatever reason. They're going to go south, and this is not a cliche. I mean, you learn from your mistakes, and the best learning, probably the most painful learning, is probably learning from not only your mistakes but other people's mistakes. You know what? And one of the things I learned too, and this came from people that I work for as well. Joe, if you're going to make a decision, make an informed decision. And you know what? If it's done with integrity and honesty, we'll back you up. And that's happened to me before. And that's a good feeling, because then you don't worry about being fired. And some of the cases that I saw went south, some of them because the person who was handling the claim just didn't give it the attention it needed. And that is a different problem. But somebody who where a case goes south and you have an adjuster who's handling it, and it's informed. They make a decision based on the facts, the law, and the policy. And if the judgment doesn't prove to be correct, so what?
Do you think, I love that mindset. You have to give the people that work with you and that you manage some room to make mistakes. They're not perfect. And if they feel that they have to be perfect, I think they're going to make more mistakes, and they're going to be on pins and needles, and it's going to be stressful for them, and it's not going to be a good experience, and then they may not stick around. But if you give some people some room and you back them up when they make mistakes, because you know that they've tried their best and they've still made that mistake, I think that's the kind of leadership that we need in law and claims. Do you see more of that as you progressed in your career? And we're going to go back to your timeline in a minute, but as you progressed in your career, did you see more leaders like that, or did you see more micromanagers?
I would say overall, I've seen more leaders like that, where they have your back. They truly have your back, and that's a good thing. I still see, on the other hand, I still see a little bit too much micromanaging. Anybody knows me knows that that's one of my pet peeves. Do not like micromanaging, and I used to say at Admiral Insurance Company, which was a great company to work for, and the whole philosophy is to decentralize. Now, you're responsible. You are responsible for how you handle a claim file. That responsibility is placed squarely with you. And they give you, and I thought a good progressive company will give you the ability to make that decision. And as long as it's an informed decision, and it's done with integrity, they will have your back, and that's a good thing. So there was, I love that about we're at Admiral, because there was not that micromanaging. But I still know that other companies micromanage, because just a quick anecdote, not an anecdote, but an example, is that I used to go to mediation quite a bit for Admiral, and I would find that the claims person who would show up, regardless of a case management order that said you have to come with complete, full, total authority, which is a nonsense. But some claims people would come to their mediation and have very little dollar authority and would always have to be on the phone. I could not be micromanaged like that. But I think things are a lot better. But I still think we have that archaic micromanaging.
What would you say to the claims adjuster that is in that micromanaging situation? Is there anything that he or she can do to get, besides leave and find another job? Is there anything he or she can do to make that situation a little more manageable?
Well, if it's ingrained in the procedures or the culture of the company, the only thing they could really do is show they know what they're doing. But if it's ingrained, I don't know that you can go much beyond that. If it's not ingrained, if there's some flexibility, then I think the claims adjuster needs to demonstrate that they know how to handle the claim, and their judgment generally, and their judgment is based on their ability to handle the claim, and it needs to be demonstrated. I found myself, and a lot of experienced people, I think, find themselves having more latitude when it comes to going to mediation, because they have the years on the job, plus they have the education throughout their career, and they've demonstrated their ability to handle these claims. They get more latitude, generally speaking.
So, all right, well, let's go back to your timeline then. You were at Allstate for 14 years, right?
Yes.
And then you go to Admiral.
No, actually, for a very short period of time, I went to Reliance.
That's right. I know I had this written down. I knew I forget. Sorry about that. So you went to Reliance. Why did you leave Allstate?
Well, Allstate was in the personal lines business, and back in the 80s and the 90s, automobile insurance premiums were a very controversial political issue. If I remember correctly at the time, and Allstate was criticized for this, it used to be Allstate Insurance Company. You would think that they would be in every state. Well, around the time that I was working in Allstate, there was one state they were not in. It was Massachusetts. And it was simply because, and I don't think this is simplistic to say it, the premium was not enough to support the losses and expenses that were paid out in Massachusetts. And it was kind of a draconian law there as far as personal lines insurance, in particular auto insurance, so they pulled out. Well, New Jersey followed suit. It became premiums at one time were the highest in the country, and there were reasons for that. But it became a change in the law was the catalyst for Allstate saying, no, we're going to surrender our license in New Jersey. And that meant that I would either have to leave Allstate or I would have to relocate. And I made a decision early in my career that relocation was not in my plan. So I was scheduled to move as what was called a casualty claim manager to Rhode Island. Certainly not across the country, but they just didn't want to relocate. And I committed to that. But during this period of time, like a lot of people there, they were looking for other carriers to work for. I had an interview with Reliance over in Philadelphia. I was in South Jersey at the time with Allstate. And they liked me. And then I decided to go with Reliance.
And ground us in what year and where were you? What year was that? And where were you as far as your family at that point?
Well, I was in Washington Township, New Jersey, Gloucester County, which is about maybe 10, 15 miles from the city of Philadelphia. And it was around 1992 that I made the transition over to Reliance and Philly.
And still married? You have kids at that point? What's the family life look like?
One son, one wife.
I'm sure she'll be happy to hear that.
Yeah, the family was intact in New Jersey. I was able to, maintain my home and the relationships I had with extended family and friends. And I went to work. I was able to make the transition.
And right around that time, early 90s, what was there in the claims insurance world? Was there a respect for work-life, family balance? What was that like in your experience?
I think it was starting. That's an interesting question. I think there were still vestiges of you sacrifice everything for a company, but there was definitely change going on. That work balance, and I don't know when it happened. I guess the 80s and 90s, but the work-life balance I think was beginning to be recognized as an important issue. Certainly not to the extent it is today, but I still saw a lot of sacrifice being expected, sacrifice to the detriment of a balance in your family work life.
Well, what at that point in the early 90s, let's just even say 80s, early 90s, I didn't recall insurance companies having work from home. Like a lot of insurance companies now, the adjusters work out of their house. I don't think that was the case in the 80s. You had to go into the office, which probably made the work-life balance a little bit harder. What's your take on that technology change, the ability to work from home versus having to go into physical office?
Well, I think it's great. Now, going back, there was a time where I was called a road adjuster, and if you it was pretty cool because if you could get that type of a position, and I had that position before I decided that I wanted to get into management. I wish I had that position a little bit longer because as a road adjuster, you handled specific territory, and I did work. I could have worked out of the house full time. That was the exception. That was unique. But we certainly did not have the flexibility today. There's much flexibility in terms of hours and where you worked.
And I had that exact same reaction. So we're filming this, I think, week 8 of a shutdown and COVID, and week 1 or 2, we've always had the work from home capability. So it was just essentially just kind of transitioning more full time. But then about week 1 or 2, I heard law firms that had to entirely shut down to get the processes in place to set their employees up. And I was just like, really? I mean, I just assumed everybody had already gone on that bandwagon. Apparently not. But yeah, even in 2020, it's an issue. Let's talk about some of the other cultural differences that you saw 80s, 90s that maybe are different today, whether, the gender differences in leaderships, where women, you see a lot of more women in claims and elevating in management now. I deal with a lot more women now than I did 10, 15 years ago. Or what, talk about the difference in culture that you see from 80s, 90s to now.
Well, I could talk the starkest contrast to make a point of that there's been such a great change is probably even going back to late 70s, early 80s was, guys had to wear jackets and ties, not necessarily a white shirt, although I understand that not too long, not too. There was a period of time even before I started where white shirts were the norm. So guys wore jackets and ties. Women wore business suits. It was mostly men. In fact, it was certainly mostly men in management uh, early on in the career. And there was even less women, if there could be that much, in executive positions. Smoking was allowed in the office.
No way, really?
Oh,
I don't.
yeah.
I'm too young for that. Then I would never remember that. That's fascinating.
I can remember looking over it. You could tell the day my supervisor was having a bad day when you saw the amount of smoke hovering over his head.
How big their ashtray was.
Yeah, so smoking was allowed. There was certainly lack of diversity um, at that time. And as I said, there weren't many women at all. The further you went up the pyramid, the less women there were. Yeah, I agree with you. I think I deal with more women. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I probably had more in my career, more managers, uh, more of my managers were women than men. But I still think, you still have a very narrow. It appears to me, from my very narrow position where I sit, that there are more women in the claims positions, more in middle management and immediate management. But there's still probably there's not enough in upper executive management.
Yeah, we're taking over. We're coming. We're coming for those top seats. I'm
Yeah,
just-
we got a bunker.
yeah, I mean, I think that's the case. A lot of professions. My profession's really bad. You get to equity partnership, and when the numbers just drop significantly, it's changing. It's a matter of time. It sounds like well, maybe I'll pull up the data on the claims side of that. I'm sure there's stats out there somewhere.
Sure.
Um, what do you think there is? So, if you compare the time of when you managed mostly men maybe mostly Caucasian men, and how they handled claims versus, more recently when you had maybe a more diverse team? Did you see any differences in how they would resolve or advance their claims moving forward?
Well, that's a very good question.
Am I putting you on the spot again?
No, that's okay. What do I care? I'm near the end of my career, so
This is why I love having you on, because you don't care. I love the honest answer.
um, yeah, probably, and I think it's for the better. You know, first of all, I hate stereotyping and generalizing. I think they're very, the cliched slippery slopes. But I don't think it's fair to the people when you generalize or stereotype, I should say. Um, yeah, I mean, it appears that women might bring a different approach, and I'm not going to tell you what that is. But I would say that it is positive. Well, I don't want to be I may come across as like, let's say you're handling it. This is real anecdotal. I mean, let's say I come across as a real hard ass when it comes to, oh, we're going to, we got great liability and damages, take it all away or whatever. And I can remember anecdotally, a manager of mine who happened to be a woman and say, yeah, that sounds like the way to go, but maybe we should think about it this way. And this way being a more, not a sensitive approach, but a bigger picture approach in terms of being sensitive to what the other person, why they're acting the way they are, why they want so much money. I have no idea whether that's female, male. I'm not a sociologist or psychiatrist, but it just seemed to be at that point a little bit of a difference. I'm thinking maybe I need to take a bigger picture and stop being that hard ass that I was talking about. That's my best answer. I have nothing else for you.
Well, I think I ask it because I have my own views on that. A well-rounded, diverse team, whether that's, men and women or different ethnicities, that's always, I think, better for what we do. I've said this before, we are in the business to some extent of predicting what a judge, a jury, a mediator, a fact finder is going to do with our claim. And you don't know who that person is. You don't know who their background is. So the more well-rounded you have of your team, and to be able to bounce things off of each other, because if you all come from the same socioeconomic background and you all come from the same state, or if you all come from the same experiences, you're not going to always get the person that's deciding how much your claim is worth. So having it well-rounded, I think it only benefits people. But I do think, I will generalize, I think many women do bring certain more traditionally feminine traits to the litigation and claims handling that do benefit. We need both. We need yin and yang, and we need them to collectively. We need the aggressive, dominant, I'm going to plow over you kind of mentality, and we need the gentle. And whether that's men or women, I don't know. Well, let's go back to your bio. There's so many questions I want to get to, but you go to Reliance, correct? That you leave Allstate, you go to Reliance. How long do you stay there?
It was only about 11 months.
And then you go to Admiral, which is where you stay for 27 years.
That's correct.
Okay. Tell us generally what your journey at Admiral was like. What kind of claims you handled or positions you held?
Well, it was a fantastic experience. I was initially hired, and I don't know that this is unique to the industry. I think this is pretty much a common pattern. I was hired as an environmental. It was called a claims superintendent. That was the formal position. But I was hired to handle environmental and toxic tort claims. A big deal in the early 90s, 80s, 90s, even through the beginning of the new century. A lot of environmental cases, a lot of them because a catalyst might be the Superfund Act. Pollution all over the place, it seemed like it anyway. A lot of toxic tort claims beginning with probably asbestos. But then that evolved too, lead poisoning and breast implants and silicosis and things like that. And it really required someone with a lot of expertise. I mean, the common denominator, I think, was the ability to read and understand a policy, in particular a CGL policy, in the context of what a specific state says it really means. I mean, I really cut my teeth and I loved it. But then what happened, and this is the unique part, Units were individual claim units within insurance companies would specialize in these types of claims. And it had all the sexy parts of the coverage controversies, like trigger coverage, allocation, whether it even was property damage or bodily injury to begin with. And when I say allocation, I mean more than one policy being triggered to address a claim. And then I would say within 6 months, I used to kid around with a former manager. Within 6 months, dumped on me, and I use that word, a bunch of construction defect claims. And these claims had, although different, construction defects causing bodily injury and property damage, although different from the environmental toxic tort, they were common, very common in the sense of coverage issues. Which policies are triggered? One of the things about the construction defects, as you know, is that they happen the moment somebody does the defective work, but may not make themselves visible or discoverable or manifest until years later. So it had the same type of coverage issues that environmental claims have, also latent in their nature. You can have pollution happening for a while, then all of a sudden, boom, you discover that everything's polluted 10 years later. So it had the common coverage issues. So it was natural, I thought, that I would fall into, or my unit would handle these types of construction defect claims. And as I learned from making the rounds at mediations and stuff, this experience was the same that many companies were experiencing. And that is, it was natural for companies to evolve in a construction defect claim handling. And a great basis for that, or foundation for that, was starting out in environmental and toxic tort, to the point where after about 6 months, my pending, my inventory of claims gradually became more construction defect than the toxic tort and environmental.
What was your favorite, if you could say one, what was your favorite type of claim or area that you handled?
I really enjoyed the large construction defect claims, not necessarily involving just residential, commercial, but the large claims the issues were, there were myriad of defects. It wasn't just one. It wasn't just a roof leaking. Where the defects were plentiful in a large project, and where a lot of parties were involved: subcontractors, general contractors, construction managers, architects, and engineers. I enjoyed those because the fun part of that, or the challenging part of that, was to solve a major problem, and that is to try to reach a settlement involving all these parties, all of their interest, and added to that the coverage challenges, because you have other insurance companies involved.
The stuff that you were handling was complex, lots of players, I assume high dollar, lots at stake. Did that ever make you nervous? Even when you're, 20, 30 years handling claims, what's that stress level like for you?
Sure. Well, with experience, even today when I get an assignment, I'm still a little nervous. I mean, I think getting your adrenaline pumping, getting those nerves a little bit on edge, but not too much, having a little bit of stress, and the stress which is motivating, not the stress that paralyzes you. I think it's a good thing, because I find myself, my thinking is a little bit more clearer. But yeah, to this day, I still have those feelings, which I think are productive.
I ask these questions because I've been practicing on the defense side for 22 some years. I've lost track, especially now. I have no idea what day or year it is, it seems. But over the years, I hear that a lot as far as increase in claim loads, the micromanaging stuff, and the complex stuff, and how they're managing that stress. Because I think claims, and this is me totally assuming, but I think claims is a lot like the law profession, that there's not a lot of internal procedures that deal with the mental health of the people that are handling this stuff. And so I'm curious to see how you manage that. And you totally didn't answer that question, but that fascinates me. because a lot of people I know in claims do jump around from job to job because it's stressful. They don't like it, for some of the reasons that we talked about today already. So the
I'll
fact
tell you,
that,
to
go ahead.
piggyback on that a little bit, I'll tell you what is probably important for someone in leadership it's possible, somebody's going to be so stressed out that it's going to impact their performance and their physical health and their mental health, obviously. A good leader or a good manager will recognize that and say, this has been said to me. He said, Joe, this has been said to me before. Joe, why don't you take the day off tomorrow? Try to relax as much as you can. I'm not going to tell you how to relax, but get away from it a little bit. I think a good leader will recognize that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think we could probably do an episode talking to the leadership management, and we could do another episode just talking to younger claims professionals. I think that's a great point, is really having your finger on the pulse of what's going on with the people that you manage is super important. And if you want to have claims that are handled well, yeah, you have to do that. I would think. You stayed with Admiral for about 27 years. What made you decide to leave?
I would say, I know I don't look it, but I'll be 65 soon. I retired in July of 2019 from Admiral, but I didn't retire from the business because I enjoy this. I still enjoy this business. The day I stop learning is the day that I'll hang it up. But I enjoy this business. And I always had kind of a dream of mine to go out on my own. I didn't have the guts to go out on my own because that takes guts. I mean, if you're an equity partner in your firm or you're a partner in your firm, that takes guts. I mean, you think about it. And I'm probably fitting nicely with the industry. I'm not really a risk taker too much. I mean, I'll do conservative risk, but not those types of risk. Where going out on your own really means that your success, it falls on your ability to do the job. But putting that aside, I always wanted to have my own business. I was in a position financially that I could do it, fortunately. And I decided that I wanted to start a business during a pandemic.
What better time to do it, right?
So that's why. That's the reason why. And I have more flexibility. I always kind of wanted to be my own boss. And sometimes my boss is a pain in the ass. But I wanted to be my own boss at times. I left. Working at Admiral was a fantastic experience. Good people there.
So before I wrap up with my kind of what you're doing now, I want to just say, looking back now, you've been 30, 40 years in the business, right? Before you decided to kind of go on your own. What would you do it all over again? Looking back now?
Yes. Any so-called regrets I may have had was maybe I should have made a better choice when I was in college about my major or what school I selected. And LaSalle College was when LaSalle University was a great school. I don't regret going there. I just really didn't give thought to going to a different college with a different major. I would definitely, I would do this again. It's been a great experience, and I learned quite a bit. And I think I learned quite a bit. It was always challenging. It was always challenging to me. I can honestly say that I recall maybe a handful of times that I had a boring day. I have not been bored. It wasn't. I didn't watch the clock.
What would you say has been the biggest change you've seen in the industry, in the claims insurance industry itself?
Other than some cultural changes, by technology by far, the internet is incredible. Sometimes the internet is incredible. I think about how we did our jobs before ubiquity of a PC and then the internet, and I wonder how the heck did we do our jobs? I mean, the tools are fantastic, and now this is a hobby with me, I guess, but now I'm just completely amazed by this so-called insurtech stuff. The ability. In fact, I did a course through the Insurance Institute, a designation program. It was data analytics, and how what has happened, I think, over the last 10 years is the ability of taking all this data, the humongous amounts of data that insurance companies have, and put it to use. Not just a place to warehouse stuff, but a place to actually developed. One of my favorite words is an algorithm. I have an algorithm for cutting grass these days. But algorithms and how you can use data to be more efficient. And now with this InsurTech, where you have it has evolved into artificial intelligence and telematics and wearables and all that stuff. And you're learning, besides learning a new vocabulary, I'm amazed at of those changes that are coming along using data to be more efficient. And so I think the big changes are, other than people changes, but I'll mention that in a second, is ubiquity of the PCs, the internet, and now the ability to use data better for everyone to do their jobs more efficiently. The only people thing I would say, and this is not an amazing discovery, is that we do have there's going to be that talent gap that a lot of people probably are sick about hearing. But you got baby boomers like myself. I think the years are from 46 to 60 or 64 or something like that. They're retiring. So you have this so-called talent gap. What I'd like to see, and this is a bias on my part, it would be cool for the industry to develop like a reserve corps for retirees, for a fee, by the way. But not unlike how like during this coronavirus we have medical professionals that are being called back and that help out. I thought, wow, what a great concept! You don't have to worry about a talent gap if you have somebody, weathering that storm. If you can have a group of reserve corps of claims people to come back and help out from time to time. So I think that would be great.
That's a great idea. They do that with judges. They pull retired judges out when maybe the volume gets high or somebody leaves or whatever. But to have a pool of people with knowledge that you can tap into when necessary, I think it's great. Do you know if anybody's doing that? Maybe you can start that.
Yeah, well, I have none of my ideas are novel. I plagiarized quite a bit.
As we all do.
I must have heard that someplace. But yeah, I think there might be. I just don't have it at the tip of my fingers. But retire. I do know this. And in at least one company that I know about, retirees are kind of, to get them to stick around a little bit longer so that they can help train newer folks, is that they're given incentives to stick around for maybe another 6 months. And while their caseload is reduced, there's more of a mentorship and training responsibility that they have. And it winds down to the point that they can eventually retire. But there's a company out there, I forget the name of it, that people actually stick around who are going to retire that would not have stuck around if they didn't have this opportunity to share a little bit of knowledge and they can wind down. I like this. That would be cool, but also, maintaining a reserve capability. So in times of like these catastrophes, let's say, coronavirus is I think I read this morning that, the industry we're talking about billions of dollars in potential claims. But we're also running into other catastrophic type seasons. Hurricanes, fire, every part of the country has its own problem. But, claims people need to be available. We're going to have, there's going to be some challenges in being able to handle those claims as they come up. So we can take care of the talent gap. I think there's practical ways to do it.
Well, I love that you came on today. I really do want to have another episode with you. I feel like I only tapped a small part of that brain of yours. But tell people what you're doing now and where they can find you.
Well, I'm doing consulting work. It's John Foley Claim Consulting. Attendance at mediations, monitoring settlement conferences or trials, attending settlement conferences, monitoring trials, evaluating cases from both a liability and defense standpoint, coverage and defense standpoint. Training. I still very much enjoy training, whether it be over the screen or in person. I'm going to be doing some training through the American Academy, the Academy of Insurance, I should say, probably in the fall. But I could be found at, and I have to look at this, I can be found at cdclaimsresource.com. I do more than CD Claims, but that's the one I thought of when I set it up. So it's cdclaimresource.com. And I also have a blog that I'm trying to make meaningful. So you can get that blog, that site through the website.
And you're also on LinkedIn. That's how we met. So
I forgot LinkedIn.
Hooked, because I know that you post claims relevant information, and I think that's helpful for some people. So, well, Joe, I appreciate it. I'm going to drop your contact in the show notes too, in case anybody wants to reach out to you. I love the fact that you came on. I think what you have to say is so important, and I hope that people hear that. So thank you so much. And hey, everybody, if you happen to like the episode, hit that subscribe button, give us a rating, review, appreciate it, and then join us next time. Until the defense never rests. We'll see you then.